É verdade, fica só a cabeça.
Olá, olá, vamos retornando aos poucos aqui para o auditório.
Take our seats. Let's return to the auditorium so that we can move on with our discussions.
Gonna wait for you, and we're gonna start soon our next session. So please, we wait for you here.
Boa tarde, gente.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's take our seats.
I will speak in Portuguese, so if you need translation.
don't forget your headphone. Espero que o almoço tenha sido revigorante, né? Agora pra gente continuar.
I hope your lunch was enjoyable so that we can restart now. We are going to start with our first panel, Politics in the Matrix, Top-Down, Bottom-Up Intersections and Expert Activism in Institutional Ethno-Racial Data Production. Before I call the guests, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Thais Cruz. I'm a doctoral student in sociology at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, and I'm also part of the InfoCitizen project, and also I am part of the project with the University of Antwerp. So I'm very happy with this week that we started in Maré, and we are ending now at Fiocruz. I'd like to call to the table Gisele Brito, who is a master student, doctorate student at FAO. She is representing the Black Coalition for Rights in the Climate Fund.
Actually, I will speak in English now. I invited you Mona Eikens. Mona is a Berlin-based development psychologist and social science whose work examines how racialized structural inequities become embodied and shapes health disparities across the life course. And she co-led the Afro Census at TH1, and is a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. Convido também.
I'd like to invite to this roundtable Susana Leves, who is a master in economy and public policies, and she works in the National Institute of Statistics in Portugal, developing research and result analysis in the following fields: equality, non-discrimination, life conditions, crime, justice, gender violence, education, and training. I'd like to invite to the table Marta Antunes, doctor in social anthropology from the Federal University, master in social science and development and agriculture at the Rural University, and she's graduated in economy by the Technical School of Lisboa. She is also a researcher at the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. I'd like to invite Kátia Nunes. Kátia, she is a social psychologist and she's part of ISCTE, and also she is a service director of statistics on labor market, on education, equality, justice, and non-discrimination. To mediate this panel, I'm going to call Daniela Lingus. She's a postdoctorate student at InfoCitizen, and she's going to be the mediator. Can you hear me?
Sim.
Yes.
Eu vou falar em português.
I'm going to speak in Portuguese, but sometimes I'm going to speak in English.
In English, but mostly Portuguese. Então, boa tarde.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to start with this first panel in our conference. This panel is inviting us to think about data not only as technical products, but also technical political infrastructure that are organizing visibility, belonging, and citizenship. So the idea here is not to oppose top-down and bottom-up, but to think about meetings and getting together with institutional bodies and grassroots communities that are going to reconfigure each other. So I'm going to explain the structure of this panel. First of all, each one of the members are going to present their projects for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have this leading question for them to answer, and then the idea is to open up to the audience so that we can have this dialogue. So I'd like to invite Gisele to present her slides. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very happy because we have simultaneous translation. You have the opportunity to hear me speaking with my horrible English, and now I'm going to sound more clever. I take care of climate and city at Peregun, which is a black organization of this in this branch of the black movement that has always believed in data production to provide visibility to racism in Brazil. So this current of the black movement belongs mainly to black women. It's a feminist black movement, and it was very important to help us understand that in Brazil, well, we have this National Institute that has been collecting data since slavery, but at many points in history, we no longer have racial data, and there was an interpretation from the black movement that those data were key for us to understand social inequalities in Brazil. So let's start with my presentation.
Não, era para estar já. Acho que eles estão pedindo para esperar pouco.
Just a minute.
Eu vou falando enquanto isso.
Pronto.
Aí acho que eu que passo aqui, né? Não. Se você puder, tudo bem. Em 91, por exemplo, o movimento negro
1991, the black movement has launched a campaign called Don't Let Your Identity Be White, declare yourself as black in your document. So this idea about a city, I'm going to read this part that says, this territory, which is the territory of Bexiga, a black territory, a black neighborhood in the city center of São Paulo, which used to be a quilombo, should have trainings, including housing policies, keeping the racial profile of this region, using as a parameter the racial profile of the last census. So we had the action of the black movement, thinking about the census and changing the census. That's how we were able to get that. And I'm going to show the data production that led us to this result. So this is Rio de Janeiro, and this is the map of the metropolitan region of São Paulo. This central area, in reality, is concentrated the white population of the city. So you may notice that in this territory we have from 7 to 20% of black population. It means that for each 100 people we have 20 declaring black and brown, and that includes workers, people living in the streets and occupations. At Peregun, we have Pedro Mendonça producing this map, and we have a reading of this map showing that this is this racial segregation
e áreas
pa-
diversas
um,
onde se concentra
pattern
a
of
população
Brazil, where we concentrate the racialized population. And this process is key to build identities because the whiteness has a great identity. We have this pack of whiteness here in Brazil. Narcissist pact, and that is making it harder for us to see the racial issue as key in our problems. So we are able to say that we have problems in the favelas, but it's hard for us to say that this is a racial problem. This is not a legacy from slavery. It's produced and reproduced by the legislation. This place is called Vai Vai, that is in this neighborhood called Bexiga. This is a samba school, the oldest one in the city of São Paulo. On the sign you read, "My people, my race, my school." That samba school was passing on one of the most important avenues of the city, over the river Saracura, and where there was a quilombo during slavery. So it was removed to build this subway station with this private-public partnership, and we were able to find more than 100 archaeological pieces. You may go to Mobiliza Saracura account on Instagram to know more about that. Most of the pieces are religious pieces from this African religion. This is a bead necklace referring to the Orisha Omolu, and then here a reference to Orisha Xangô. And we had expectations when we started with the subway construction there. We knew that people would be evicted. This is a black neighborhood, and we must deal with that. And in Brazil, gentrification is not a racial aspect. It's very normal that we are going to have public investments and the territory is going to change. So we started to produce data to understand how it was happening. So we used some data from census.
Tudo bem, pode ficar tranquilo. Tem, sem spoiler. Não olha, fecha os olhos, ok.
And we started to produce data. All of that was developed by Pedro Mendonça when he worked with us at Peregum, and we started to compare with the census. We have census every 10 years in Brazil. So this is the first sample of the census 2000 to 2010. So we collected racial data, but we didn't bring it together with the territorial data. It was only possible after the 2000s and after 2010 and 2022 with new technologies. So at Peregum, we overlapped the data and we were able to build different categories. We have the absolute whiteness, the relative whiteness, and the absolute blackness. So in the dark blue, we had absolute whitening. The black population has dropped compared to the all population, and due to the campaigns of black movements and public policies, we had a meaningful increase of people declaring as black and brown. So we have data technology here that is resolving these calculations. I don't know how to do that, but you may see in this general map that São Paulo, which is the city with the greatest black population in absolute numbers, but with a low percentage of black population, around 40%, has suffered a whitening process in many places, losing black population. So we were specifically looking at Barra Funda, that square, that dark blue square at the top, and all of these places, they call our attention because they were targeted in the 90s with projects from the state, so they suffered transformations, real estate transformations that were huge. Barra Fundo, that territory on the top, had been a quilombo It's one of the important places for Black history in São Paulo, and we were able to get this data with a different research from Live Cidade, and he was able to get a sample that was showing what happened to the people removed from Barra Funda. And this is an important piece of data because it's not produced by the state. The state knows where people are going, but it's not informing, it's not collecting racial data of people who are targeted by eviction and housing projects. So we saw that those people who left Barra Funda went to different Black territories, many of them outside of São Paulo, which are more vulnerable territories. We have the Barra Funda territory that was incorporated by this all-white community. So what happened to Barra Funda? In 2025, we saw this news piece. Barra Funda was elected the third coolest neighborhood in the world, seeing the launch of small properties booming. They cost 360,000 reais. So the Black population was evicted, then this white population is coming to the Black territory. We've written scientific articles on that, we've published on different magazines, and we've been showing that around. So this map that I'm showing here is the same map that I've shown to public school girls who are vulnerable in the state of São Paulo, and also in different occupations, more than 24 occupations in the state of São Paulo, for women's groups within the public university, talking to lawyers in the Ministry of Justice, for different health agents in the College of Architecture and Urban Planning. And the same map was published in newspapers. And now I'm showing that to you because this fact is unknown or ignored or kept hidden, kept invisible on purpose.
As I said, this does not happen by chance. This is reproduced and this is replicated. Here you can see it throughout the years, and that is why we draw back on that law. We said this cannot happen. It's not natural. We need legal devices so it doesn't happen again. Of course, in Brazil, we say that there are laws that stick and laws that don't stick. What we needed then was to create a political environment from data collection favorable for other generations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Giselle. We'll switch to English.
And let's start with Muna. As Thais said, she was the co-leader of Afrocensus. So thank you, Muna.
Thank you. I hope you can understand me well. Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be here. And I want to thank the people translating for being the bridge so we can understand each other, because the last 3 days I wouldn't have gotten anything in Portuguese if you weren't there. Thank you. And you're doing a very, very good job. I haven't seen that quality of translating so fast. Thank you. So I will get into my presentation if it works.
Can we switch to Muna's presentation? Yeah?
Thank you. I just have to.
We have to. Okay.
Okay. So I'm Somali native, and I was raised in Germany, and I live in Berlin. And I am, I came as a minor refugee to this country, just so you know what my background is, before I get into the work we're doing in Germany.
Yeah, let's wait for a little bit because I know it's, yeah, it's okay. We can change the dynamic. We have to be, you know, it's okay.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. So I'll present the Afrocensus. It was conducted in 2020. It's a community-based research project. The community I work with, or I am part of, is Each One Teach One. We call it IOTO. And the Afrocensus is a communities-based, communities-owned, and communities-driven project on the perspectives, experiences of anti-Black racism and engagement of Black, African, and Afro-diasporic communities in Germany, and also in German-speaking countries. So people from Switzerland as well as Austria were also invited to be part of it. So I work at Each One Teach One. IOTO is a communities organizing body, or as part of the Black movement in Germany, and its main focus is on communities building and empowerment work, and we focus a lot on, or our angle is mostly education and literature. So IOTO's work is based on a library we have, and it's the largest library in Germany by now, with 8,000 books of Black, African, Afro-diasporic authors. So we started with this library, and then inviting especially the youth to take part and spend some time there, and from there we built different projects, like you have been also seeing the last days Hejese Mare did. So we do, in a different context, a bit similar work. We have a network on anti-Black racism, and we have young people projects, as I told you. We focus a lot on literature and culture. We do every year, or sometimes every second year, the Afrolution Festival. We also focus on leadership and advocacy, so also a lot on policy work, and we document and monitor the experiences of Black, African, and Afro-diasporic people in Germany. This is the research team I'm part of, the Afrocensus PIs, the Afrocensus Research Group or Research Leader. And as you can see, we have been doing this during the pandemic. So Afrocensus Research Project is part of Black movements, as I said, and is specifically considering the Black Atlantic. So that's why I'm also so happy to speak here, because we all learn from each other, and we're well connected, even if it might seem we're not. Yes, so for the German context, what's important to mention is that based on German colonialism and Nazi eugenics, we have Germany committing the first genocide of the 20th century, and as well as the Nazi policies of racial hygiene and the systematic murder of millions of people. And with this history, we're based in a continuation of racialization and a race-evasive discourse and science, which means we don't have any data on race. And the government also doesn't want to collect data on race because of the atrocities that happened. So it's kind of, we need to make people's experiences visible. So usually the debate goes to displace racism temporarily, like it's a thing of the past, socially or geographically, like that's a US problem or there's a UK problem, but not a German problem. Though almost half of the German population still believes in the existence of human races. And yeah, so the Afrocensus project is based within these discourses and conditions and movements. And it's a communities-led research project where we try to fill this gap of quantitative, especially quantitative research, with the do no harm policy, like to have a safer space to collect data. So communities' data ownership and monitoring is essential. It has it's a mixed method research project, so we say numbers don't explain mechanisms. That's why we also need qualitative data. And theoretically, it's based within critical emancipatory Black and African feminist decolonial practices. So we were quite happy that almost 10,000 people signed up for the survey, and 6,400 participated in the end. And after data cleaning, we had around 5,700 or 5,800 participants. And the core principles I want you to focus on is it's based on self-identification, if people identify themselves as being Black, African, or Afro-diasporic, but also on the really important principle of no harm. Data must not be misused, because that's what people, because of German's history, also worry about. So we wanted to show that the Black communities are diverse and simultaneously have shared experience, but also that anti-Black racism is a very specific form of racism. In terms of self-positioning, here you get people identify, mostly Black, and then Afro-German or African German. And we asked, we wanted to do an intersectional study, so we asked a lot of different diversity dimensions. I won't go into the details, but yeah. So here you see the display of what people, what their experiences were, what they were reporting. And as you can see, in all areas of life, we asked about 14 areas. They reported discrimination everywhere. And the blue part is like they report I never experienced discrimination there, but other than that, it's, as you can see, a lot of reports on discrimination. And we structured the survey like if they had contact with the health sector, and if they experienced discrimination, and if they experienced discrimination, what they think, what they would say was the reason. And here you can see that most, over 90% report that it was due to racist reasons, ethnic origin, or skin color, and then gender. So you already see also the intersections within the Black communities with women and non-binary people, and experiencing more intersectional racism as well. So almost, yeah, this is really sad. 79% of people reporting their experience anti-Black racism. And we could make clear what the patterns and the dynamics are, mainly processes of being othered, being racialized, racially marginalized in terms of you don't belong here, you're not from here, where you really from, you look different, etc. But also hypersexualization, criminalization, that qualifications of people and skills are not being recognized, as well as they are being de-individualized. They're representing everybody. They can't be individuals, and they are being homogenized. So it's at the same time. And we have this denial of anti-Black racism very strong in Germany, which is also part of the pattern of racism, saying there is no racism in this country. And the whole project, what is really important about this for us is not just having numbers to do policy and to impact policy and decision making, but also to empower our own people. So what we always emphasize is there's knowledge. The knowledge is already in the communities, and the question is it being recognized? So these experiences are there, and the political question is who recognizes them? Are they being seen and validated? And also to learn within our own communities what our experiences are, and then to better also support each other. So we did also a lot of recommendations for policy, but also for the communities themselves to say, like, for example, in the healthcare sector, it's important to share data on experiences and access you have with your community members. So that's a very rough 10-minute introduction to this 300-page report. So we have a German version and an English one. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mona. Now back to Portuguese. So everyone else. Eu convido a Kátia.
I invite Katia and Susana from the National Institute of Statistics from Portugal. I think I can get started, Daniela. I'll get started. So as long as we have the presentation at some point, I can start. I would like to greet you all. I would like to greet you all. Okay, here it is, the presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here to share our project and our experience in the National Institute of Statistics of Portugal, where I work and where Susana Neves, my colleague, also works. Obviously, these acknowledgements also come on behalf of the Institute as an entity in general, not only our personal acknowledgements. The Institute acknowledges the opportunity to share and to participate in this important event. Starting my presentation, I would like to start by saying that our place and what we're going to present here today is a statistical standpoint, the production of official numbers and official statistics, and a mission that belongs to all of us to build reliable data for society, for the policymakers, and to supply for the needs of the citizens of information, and to approach also diversity, answering the economic, social, and environmental needs. The project that brings us here today and that we would like to present and reflect with you is the survey on life conditions, origins, and trajectories of the population residing in Portugal. We call it ICOT. And we're based on this assumption that we have it as an attribute to understand the diversity of the population in Portugal. Contrary to Brazil, that has a long tradition of collecting information about ethnic and identity and identification, in Portugal, this pretty much does not exist. We did not have, until this survey in 2023, the collection of identification data, especially, specifically in this case, ethnic identification data, and the diversity of the population of Portugal. This is the context that we would like to present to you, and we would like to also explain why at this point in time there was the need to collect this kind of information. I'll try to go on to the next slide, how it worked. And the question that we would like to discuss now with you and to use to explain the decision making of making the survey. Why developing ICOT? Well, the debate on these topics have been growing and increasing in the last few years in Portugal, not only in Portugal, but in whole Europe. And as the need to implement political measures to fight against inequalities, racism, and ethnic discrimination, it is, the topic is prominent, as I said, and we also have a lot of plans, national plans to fight against racism and discrimination in Portugal nowadays. And we also need a growing need to improve the knowledge about the residing population, the origins, where they belong to, ethnic identification, generational trajectories, and their objective life conditions. In Portugal, there's a debate on measuring ethnic identification, and it has started a few years ago with the possibility of including ethnic identification questions in our census, the Census 2021. As well in Brazil, in Portugal, we have a census every 10 years. And there is a very strict routine in terms of the information that we collect in the census. And we were then discussing and pondering about including ethnic questions on the census, and we needed to do a preparation work for this possible inclusion of the questions. There was a decision of non-inclusion of the questions about ethnic the self-identification in the census of 2021. And then after this decision to not include the question, we put together a work group with a diverse group of people, ethnic minority groups, and many other entities that work on the subject in Portugal. The purpose of this work group, where Susanna had the opportunity to work, was to translate recommendations that could contribute to the reflection and the decision of the inclusion of a question about the ethnic background of the population residing in Portugal. We weighed the pros and cons. There was an extensive work made on the ethnic classification that would better adapt to the reality of Portugal. But as I said, this final decision was not to include it in the Census 2021.
And then the Institute has proposed this dedicated survey. We wanted this information to be collected. So the alternative that was discussed and debated in the working group was to have this dedicated survey to answer this point with this analytical committee that would be more encompassing than that of Census 2021, so that we can have the ethnical identification of the population in Portugal, also bringing the origins and trajectories of the resident populations, understanding their purposes, and also collecting for the first time information about their discrimination experiences, and that would be more complicated to survey in a census, because we have a more objective and short term goals for the entire. I'm going to give the floor to Susanna now, and she's going to explain the more concrete objectives of this survey. Good afternoon. I'm going to move on with the presentation, and I'd like you to pass with me on some of the steps of this statistical journey that was this unique milestones in the official statistics in Portugal. I'm Susanna Neves. I work with Katia, and I've been working in the development of this statistical operation, and it's in its discussion since its inception. And I'd like to thank the organization of this conference, especially the Info Citizen Project, and the kind invitation to be part of this process, learning with you and sharing with you, understanding more about the diverse realities, very different from what we have in our country. We are going to get all this information from this discussion. So Katia just said that after this great discussion, we made this decision of not including this ethnical question in the 2021 census, but to develop this dedicated survey on this topic, a more encompassing survey that could be applied to the general population in Portugal. And we faced a great problem and great challenges because we don't have experience on that in our institute. We didn't collect this kind of information, and we didn't have a reference at the European level where the statistics in Portugal are included as a member of the European Union. So from the beginning, we had this intense revision of literature. We saw how other countries, namely Brazil, for instance, were approaching the composition of their ethnical population composition in their census. And we also were able to observe the France experience concerning the origin and trajectory of their population, and that helped a lot in the development of the survey. We also had other challenges, starting with the classification itself. What would be the best classification, which categories we should use, categories with which the resident population could identify with. We should have easily understandable categories and with some concepts, because we didn't know if there was a consensus on the subject in the Portuguese society. So we had to take some legal cautions to make this happen. We also have challenges concerning methodology to find a sample or a way to design a sample that would enable us to capture what we wanted, that was the entire diversity of the population concerning their origins, trajectories, and ethnical constitution. We also had to write text about the collection method, and we opted to make the survey available online, and that we had a set of decisions like that to approach and in the pilot survey. And that leads us to the core objectives of this ICOT. I'm trying to be brief. We had two core objectives that were to characterize the different ethnical groups with which the resident population in Portugal were identifying with, and understanding in which way the people would identify and relate and interpret their origins, to understand and fight discrimination and inequalities in different fields. So with these two objectives, you have three pillars of observation and analysis. One of them is identifying the ethnical groups, therefore understanding the ethnical belonging as a result of self-classification in an approach according to human rights. So making no harm, not excluding or violating the human rights. And then we had a question about ethnical self-identification. It was a multiple response question. You could identify with one or more groups that you felt you belonged to. And differently from the official statistics, it was not mandatory. A second pillar to complement the information about the ethnical identification, we had some questions about the origins of the population. For instance, where the respondent was born, or maybe their parents and grandparents. So we tried to go to the third generation to understand the journey of that generation, to understand their geographic origins, and that information was complemented with data on mother tongues and also languages learned over their lives. And in the pillar of analysis, we wanted to approach the characterization of ethnical groups, not only from the social demographic standpoint, but also characterizing the population population in terms of their conditions
Em termos das suas condições objetivas,
and
do acesso
life
à saúde,
objectives,
do acesso à
access to health, education,
do
jobs,
seu rendimento ou das
their
rendas, como
income,
no Brasil,
as we-
aspectos ligados à
and
mobilidade,
aspects
à sociabilidade, às condições
concerning
de vida.
mobility and socialization. So
Nós pretendíamos
a vast array of domains that we would obtain information about. And also the information on discrimination prevalence with three pillars. The experience of discrimination, the perceived discrimination, and the witness of discrimination
testemunho de situações de discriminação e estas três
concerning immigrants and also the population themselves. So observing the factors that are at the basis.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Bom, e por último, mais ou menos importante,
Last but not least, I'd like to call Marta from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. Please, Marta.
Eu vou pedir para colocar
Well,
a apresentação.
I'm going to ask you to put my slides on. Please, I'm Marta Antunes. If you don't know me, I'm responsible for the management of traditional peoples in the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. It's a department that is responsible for this new ethnical group in the census of 2022 to improve the understanding of indigenous peoples. We were a working group coordinated by my team, and nowadays we are within the research department. So I'm going to bring the main methodological innovation and what is the role of collaboration and participation. And I'm talking about the collaboration between government bodies, different ministries, different institutes working with the production of statistics, and also the participation of civil society in the entire process, which is in the root of the success in terms of improving the social ethnical aspects of the census. So this working group was created in 2016. It had three main goals, and it emerged and was enhanced in the last forest and agricultural census, and we understood that we were not prepared to do that in indigenous lands with the indigenous peoples in the country, and we had to adapt this eco-census. So at this point, we create a working group to think about the 2022 census. So we had as an objective to improve the understanding of indigenous peoples. We had a lot of criticism concerning the 2010 census, not only about race and ethnicity, but also concerning this low capture of indigenous persons. And we had this historical demand from Quilombo people when they were recognized by subjects of rights and their territories and how to access. And we also should include their ethnical identification in the census 2022. So in the launching of the decree, President Lula said that after the decree, he needed a census of the Quilombo population that came 8 years later. So in this process of improving the indigenous statistics and including this ethnical group in the census, we had to build a methodology to advance, to understand the diversity of traditional communities in Brazil that are not limited to Quilombo and indigenous peoples. So as developments we bring for the next census that is going to happen next year, this methodology that is totally adapt on how to perform this census in places of traditional communities. So all the innovation that we were able to build in this consultation process for the census 2022 are going to be reviewed and are going to be applied in the next census in this broad consultation process. So for the first time, IBGE has structured this previous process of consultation according to the resolution 169, bringing leaders of indigenous peoples, Quilombo communities, besides government bodies and organized civil society, affecting a public policy that could help have positive impacts, but also negative impacts, as we've said before. So in this agricultural census, we have this consultation process ongoing, and for the first census of unhoused people, this consultation process is happening from what was happening from 2022 with the objective to improve statistics. So it's important to tell you that we understand this working group also now working with the unhoused people, that when we think about census, we think about 6 pillars. Anthropology is also embedded, so we have to understand the human interaction. So the representation of truth will depend on the 2 people that are going to participate in the interview. And I have no control on that, and no one who is developing methodology or training. So we were thinking on what made the indigenous persons tell they were indigenous in 2010. So what happened during the interview that the people were not feeling comfortable to declare their color, race, or saying if they were indigenous or Quilombo people in this census. We understood that it had to do with many things that were not only the question. So although we had tests to understand what was the best question, qualitatively or quantitatively, at the moment of the test, we only that the question itself won't solve this possibility that the person declared them as ethnically different and racially different. So in the particular case of traditional communities and peoples, I have to guarantee that the census will reach them. So I have to have this mapping that won't leave behind a community because it's hard to access, because I will have to have a helicopter to get there. I will have to walk 4 hours in the woods to get there, because I will have to climb a river, and I'll have to use a boat, because the logistics is a different chapter in this story. So we don't have a lot of studies about that, but we weren't able almost to close the last census because we didn't have access to helicopters. We had to change the administration to go to Yanomami lands and other indigenous lands. If you don't have census, you don't have a picture, you are not able to see the diversity and the brutal inequality that we have here to depict in this country and in the world. So it's not enough to have this consultation agreement as IBGE with the social society organizations, agreeing several procedures and issues, ways of working in the field. If the interviewer is going to come there with this structural racism, and I cannot guess if the person that passed the exam is going to discriminate the person at the field. So I must train them, and I'm not going to solve the structural racism that is coming with the interviewers with my training, but I'm going to do whatever I can to make that happen. So what's the different part of this equation? Is the informant. By declaring by themselves, they should know that this is a right of them. What is the question that is going to the field so that they can self-declare? In case there's an issue, it's a right of this person to complain with IBGE because I suffered a structural racism during the census. This is not something trivial. We had to request that from the informants. It was a whole campaign with indigenous leaders, Quilombo leaders, the Black movement that was supporting us in some states, so that people knew that for the first time we would have a question for the Quilombo communities, that the question about color or race is concerning what you understand yourself as, regardless of what others think. So we had this training understanding that we cannot control that moment, we cannot control the interviewers. And the survey is different in traditional communities. I cannot simply knock at their doors because it's lack of respect, because this is creating a barrier that is not necessary between IBGE IBGE and the person who is declaring their identity. So we come to the communities, we approach the leaders, we have this meeting to explain what is going to be done with the census, what the census is, what IBGE is, and with their consent, we start the collection process. If necessary, with this community guide, and also an interpreter, because we have different languages spoken, and some of them don't even speak Portuguese. So that was the object of the tests, and one of the main engagements of civil society with IBGE was to guarantee that this mapping could bring the Quilombo communities in the country, not leaving them behind, because our question was only going to be asked in the pre-mapped places. So it was a great challenge for IBGE and the social movements, because it was not their role, but they had all the interest that it happened. So we use a lot of satellite images, and also we had many different consultations with Quilombo leaders. They were still unsafe, and they asked a different way. If you're in a city, you could say, I'm from a Quilombo and I'm here. So with that, we had this WhatsApp business account, and our interns were completely crazy with that, but we were able to find over 2,000 communities in urban situations. So this is the meeting for approaching the leaders and the guides, which are key for us to have a good coverage so that people can feel comfortable to tell us about their belongings. They feel safe when we ask questions about being Quilombo people or not, indigenous people or not, what's your ethnicity, what is your language. So very briefly, that's it. I'm available to answer questions. Daniele asked me to talk fast, so that's it. Thank you, Marta. Everyone has to speak fast. Let's try to be brief again. I brought a question because I believe that all of you brought very different experiences. I'm very happy to be in such a panel, all comprised by women. This is a great privilege.
It's an achievement. It's not easy to have an all-women table. I would like to ask you, and you can answer the way that you prefer, how you feel more comfortable. How, in your experience, data production projects different political futures for the community, and what conditions, in your experience, have shaped the production of official data by statistical institutes and the community data generation? Would you like to start? Giselle is going to start for us. I like to start because I'm very anxious and I like to speak. First, it is very interesting to listen to IBGE because we have this idea, oh, Brazil is awesome. And then when you hear some things like this, we also think, oh, Brazil has big problems. And it's great to listen to the experience of Portugal. The first census in Brazil was in 1872. Brazil had its independence in 1822. So it was interesting to listen to Portugal's experience. And why did I remember this? My data production is focused on Right to the City, and I work with Right to the City and climate change. And we use the same methodology for advocacy and energy transition. In, for example, advocacy on climate finance, transporting this discussion to the impacts created by the project processes of adaptation and mitigation. So we use the same methodology, but in the case of the Brazilian Black movement, important, and that is crucial because ever since the first census, there were there were, Brazilian slavery ended in 1889. The first census was 1872. So counting the enslaved black people was paramount. It was also very important to think about ethnicity and labor. So it all exists in the document since 1822. So it was also important into positive racialization, to black awareness. Instead of having people tell you that you are black, it was important to have self-identification because so that you could say that you are black. It is important to consider that if what we had in data in 91, this campaign that said, declare yourself black. In Brazil, you have categories, which is black and brown, that the black movement understands and shows statistically that brown has a to separate black and brown. So in the future, they visualize public policies by making this distinction. And today we have public policies. I am part of the ProUni, which is a program of access to the universities through quota system. I'm from the first group of this ProUni project. And when the importance of this kind of data was imagined in the past, they aimed exactly at that, exactly in having projects like ProUni. Today, we managed to have in the law that the racial profile has to be identified in Bexiga, in this neighborhood in São Paulo, for the study of this neighborhood. It is a public policy for Brazil. Real estate development and the urban transformation, as we could see in my presentation, and as we saw in Maré, the improvement of structure in Maré does not mean that the people who live in Maré will have to move somewhere else, because that is what usually happens. Structure gets better, the infrastructure of the neighborhood gets better, and people, black people in general, end up moving away. So what we're trying to do is have this search for data. Everything that we show in data is very empirical in Brazil. We know it happens, but we have to speak in the language of the system, right? We have to show it to them in their language, and that is what we have been doing in this process. Who else would like to speak? Susanna? Could you project the presentation again, because I'm going to refer to some data. We had census since 1834, and we had never included the ethnic composition of the population in any census. We did the first time a survey that approached this topic. As I said, for us it was a relevant step. It is important to have an idea of this framework to see how relevant that step was. I would just like to highlight an aspect that was mentioned by our colleagues from IBGE, which has to do with the importance of institutional articulation and the work that was done very closely with the stakeholders, the more relevant stakeholders in these areas. Not necessarily the academia, but particularly the representatives of ethnic minority groups that work in close articulation with these groups of immigrants and minority ethnic groups. So if I had to choose an aspect that was critical, truly critical and central for the development of the statistical operation, I would say the articulation among the main stakeholders, which is very important. With the development of the ethno-racial classification in our survey. This discussion started with the discussion on the classification, and when we did the survey, we did not start from scratch. We focused on the main categories that were proposed and suggested by this census work group. In our pilot, we did a few adjustments because of the responses that we got, and all of this made the process move faster and be easier. I would also like to highlight that we had a discussion on the results with all of those partners, all of those stakeholders, and we used the pilot to discuss with the interviewers. There was a very intensive training with the interviewers because we wanted to give them tools on how to approach people, how to talk to people about this subject. And we also got from them their assessment on how they usually do the census. That feedback was paramount for us to adjust and to do some alterations in the main survey. Not only from the discussions that we had with the main stakeholders, but also including the feedback from the interviewers themselves when they gave us a few tips saying, well, this kind of question is not going to work. People don't understand questions like this. So it was important to have the feedback of the census interviewers. I'd just like to talk a little bit about this the structure, the question, the way that it was made in the pilot census. Using the following options, what kind of phenotypical characteristics do you have? That was one of the ideas for the question on ethnicity. I'm sorry, I was going the wrong direction here. I'd just like to show you very briefly this slide. In this participatory process, we had very strong participation of the High Commissioner of the United Nations on immigration. And this agency, in articulation with the communities, with the representatives of minority groups from the communities and groups of immigrants, supported us into translating the questionnaire into other languages. The issue of language could not be an impediment for our work. There were people from the communities that served as liaisons between the interviewers and the interviewees. Regarding the work inside the Institute, we had a very close collaboration with the Department of Data Protection. There are a few criteria and aspects that we had to bear in mind because we're treating data considered very sensitive. So there was a reinforcement on data protection. We adjusted a few questions. We reinforced the measures of safety so that would, in data transmission, so that there would be no kind of leakage of sensitive data. And with that, I'll pass the floor to. Can I just add something? Yes, very briefly. Okay, I'd just like to say a final comment that answers the final part of the question about the production of statistical data. Of course, our mission is to produce data and place them to the society to be used. That is the biggest intention and the biggest mission that we have. And it's also a mission of INE. And what we did specifically for the survey was to have an approach focused on making visible what was not visible in official statistics for a long time. So in addition to disseminating the data generically, as we do routinely, we made available the microdatabases for the researchers. We highlighted populational groups that usually are not encompassed in the official statistics. We highlighted the Roma population. Highlighted the Afro-descendant populations and several generations inside these groups. Just to answer the end of your question about the impact that this data has, when we show this data to the society, what happened was there was a support and follow-up of political measures. So we had information we did not have before. We had information related to the level of sustainable development indexes. We had more information about human rights, which was very important for us. We had then indicators of follow-up of certain policies. There was a public discussion and an update by the Scientific Society of this information. There were papers and reports and scientific articles based on the data that the Institute gathered. There was a bill of law against multiple discrimination and intersectional discrimination. The data is then incorporated in the European statistical system, and the survey has been referenced as a best practice. It allowed us to have all of this articulation with the civil society and future developments that I hope will continue happening on this topic. Thank you, Katia and Susanna. Mona, would you like to say something?
We are switching to English. Vamos mudar para inglês.
Thank you. What I remember from your question is
Yes,
data
you
protection
can answer however you like.
futures. So I think we're doing multiple things at the same time. So first of all, it's for empowerment and communities building of our community. So it's for visibility, to also show we have shared experiences and you're not isolated with the experiences you make in this society. And so it's against being marginalized and isolated, and showing and imagining like that these are collective experiences, and also we fight for collective narratives, and to have also to be seen and to see ourselves. So it's a lot on, I think it's a lot on the right to belong, also to be part of the German society, to be a citizen, and also to be seen as a citizen. And the second thing is, I would say we shift center of knowledge production. So what we're negotiating at the same time is a epistemological shift, because we want to be part of the knowledge production, to be the knowledge production, and to also produce our own data, and with this connected the narratives. The third and last thing I want to say about this is, because I also heard in terms of the Portugal design, that it's focusing a lot on minority framework, and we try to avoid this in the German setting, because minority implies usually there are not that many people of you, and the problem is maybe not a societal one, it's not as big, and so on. So I would frame it rather as social positioning. So it's also about racial problems and equity problems, and less about ethnic, like where you're from, what your background is, and we all have different ethnic backgrounds, and this is also linked to culture and history and so on. But the racial social positioning, I think we need other measures for this, and then also specifically talk about power, because we usually negate then the power dimension. And because what we wanted to do with the Afro census is also to show the problem is structural, it's not personal or individual, it's structural, and it's about the access I mentioned to society, and that we are not being marginalized because of power dynamics and not because we are minorities in a certain country, which is also usually, if you go back into German history, there have been black people there for quite some time, but they are still considered as they came, I don't know, a decade ago, and people view this in this narrative of minority, which as I said, which we try to avoid. And I would focus on the equity claims and the access to society. What is our all right to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. And agora a Marta, a Marta tá lá no final.
Martha's right at the end of the table. Before I talk about the future, I think it is important to talk about the past. When we reached the COVID-19 pandemic, ABGE was asked to give data on the age and the quantity of riverside communities. The indigenous peoples were priority for vaccination. So we first planned their vaccination, and then we came up with the logistics of vaccination. So we did not have this data, but we gave a rough estimate, starting with what we had already mapped, and that truly made vaccines arrive where they wouldn't arrive for the quilombolas and the riverside communities, as well as for the indigenous communities. So when we talk about ethnically differentiated data, we're also talking about access to differentiated policies, not only alternatives, but also focusing the policies according to the specificities. So basic sanitation and education that has differentiated policies here in Brazil, and also data on access of these people to rights. Without this kind of data, we cannot have specialized policies and differentiated policies. With the improvements of Census 2022, we can visibilize and problematize inequality, structural inequality.
And also, we should think about the righteous cities, because the indigenous peoples, the Quilombo people, they don't have access to the city as the rest of the city has. So coming to a place where you have more access to sanitation and education won't guarantee the access of those people who are ethnically different. So when we work with the census, we are able to take this piece of data, this visibility of inequality, for this to great detail. So we are able to give that to this data on education, access to jobs. We can have this granularity according to the municipality. So it's a very rich piece of data. So we wanted that to go to the universal questionnaire of the census, and it was a huge fight to make it remain until 2022. The fact that we are asking this question for groups that are rarefied in the national territory but concentrated in this space, regardless of the sample, enables us to give data that is very close to the reality of these groups, where they are. So that enabled us to have the first official mapping of the Quilombo locations. They are not communities, they are not territories, but the concentration point within that space with 15 or more Quilombo people living together. So we have coordinates for each place in the national territory where you have more than 15 people living together that are from Quilombos or indigenous communities. So the Brazilian state cannot say that they cannot find these people to guarantee rights, to estimate the amount of schools necessary. to think about sanitation according to their behaviors, their customs. So we have the regulated territories, but some that we don't even have in other communities. So this is something that we couldn't foresee. So the quota law was reformulated to include indigenous people, Quilombo people from the data of 2022 census. So we are bringing affirmative action for people who didn't have access to that. We were doing that, thinking about people of African descent, but we didn't have this idea for indigenous people and Quilombo communities. And now we have the data available. So the census has this power to drag the statistic production. And what we call CAD Único is going to bring 28 new groups in the next agricultural and forest and agricultural census. And we knocked on the door of them and said, you don't have all of the groups. Can we work together? And CAD SUS is going to do the same. When you're able to show that the official institute is able to have different categories on traditional communities, and you're able to take that to the census, the bodies also feel confident to take that to their registers. So we've been doing that since 2024 with these two bodies, and this is thanks to the success of including the Quilombo communities. At the beginning of the census, we had the total Quilombo people we had at CAD Único after 2 months of collection. In some places, we were able to triple that number. What we had in the administrative records. It's not because the census is good and CAD Único is not, because we have access to the registers because we have access to the public policy. And some people are not even able to register in the CAD Único as a traditional community person. So we have campaigns to raise awareness. So these are official data that are feedbacking. So we have the statistics produced by the census and the registrations that are not finding this population that was given by a census. So these are actions that can give feedback to each other. So we are now placing the different indigenous communities, Quilombo communities. So a census is very powerful. When it's taught in terms of statistics and geography, it can help us advance with policies and rights. Thank you, Martha. Please, a round of applause to this wonderful panel. Now, due to time constraints, we are going to have a short round of questions, and then we are going to wrap this panel up. If you have questions, please ask. Let's collect 2 to 3 questions, and then we are going to respond and end this panel. You want to ask questions? No? Good afternoon. My name is Valéria Castro. I work here at Fiocruz in a department that is discussing violence and health. And I wanted to ask a question because I was very motivated by our German colleague concerning the harmful use of data and information, because we are living in a country that has experienced dictatorship and also many violent instances. So I think about the trust in making this data available, if you feel safe or not. When we go to urban territories that are affected by violence, is how to deal with this information so that this information won't be distorted or used in a bad way. Because we see growing in the world, especially in Latin America, this far-right view that is considering us as enemies to be fought. So concerning this organized crime issue, which is transnational, now we have leaders saying that this is terrorism. So how to deal with this conjuncture, with this context that is fluid, that is changing? Because if today we have in data collection and information collection this possibility to develop more equal policies, maybe we won't be able to have that in the future. So we must think about that as a political context that is always changing, always transforming. So I'm thinking about the networks and alliances that we could develop in order to face that. But in my opinion, this is a great concern that we must take into account, not only collecting data and making information available, we must think about this political context as well. Thank you.
Mais alguma questão?
Any other question?
Então a gente termina mais essa questão e daí a gente.
So let's take this other question and then we answer, okay?
Obrigado. Boa tarde.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Paulinho from Data Lab, from the Citizen Generated Network.
Se parece, mas ela é diferente para quem é das agências governamentais e estatais.
I would like to ask a question that is different for the state bodies and for the civil society organizations, but it comes from the same background. Normally, when we produce data or information which are racialized or concerning the territories, if we are from civil society, people believe that this is not important, that we're doing something foolish, that we have other priorities. But if we are in the state bodies, this is seen as something that is time-consuming, that is going to be very costly. The technical procedures won't enable us to do that. So the epistemic side of other types of knowledge, they're always trying to dismiss these initiatives that you just presented. So I wanted to listen from you. What were the strategies that you developed in order to
barrar esse tipo de conhecimento que vocês conseguiram produzir?
Counter this narrative, to face that kind of reaction. Do you use some technicalities? Do you use your do you deal that in a flexible way? What did you do when you face this kind of challenge? Thank you. Thank you. Mona, could you please start by answering?
The last question, I'm not sure if I understood it. Means when you go to to governmental institution to explain why data collection is necessary, or
I was thinking maybe you could answer the first one and then maybe because. Just switching to Portuguese, a primeira foi uma pergunta geral para a mesa. Okay, so the second question is like a general question for the table. So maybe you could answer the first one and then we could split the second.
Yeah, the first one, it's quite challenging to handle data in this political climate, especially when it's in terms of racism and other injustices. So I think it's really important to have time to build trust with your own communities, and to explain. We had to answer a lot of questions as researchers, as part of the community. What will happen to this data and with this data? At the same time, we had the opportunity to ask them, what do you want to be? What do you want the data to be about? Like, what do you want to, on which topics we have these resources? These are not that many, so we can focus, for example, on two main area of lives in this survey, and they decided us to focus on education and health. And specifically when it's about health data, it's quite sensitive. And there we try to to support and also to understand as researchers ourselves that it's this consent they are giving us is a process, and it's not a one-time point conversation or a formula, a form I bring and then they sign it. So in terms also of this health data aspect, what I really liked is what Nyanjala was already referencing is the Maori communities data practices where it's collectively owned. So that I would say the data needs to be community based and communities owned, but also collectively in a structure where not just one or two people decide what will happen to the data and who will get access, but a collective, and that we check and double check these structures within our own communities. And I'm not talking about the complications working with state institutions. I think that would go too far. Thanks.
Thank you. Agora, a segunda questão, eu não sei se...
Now about the second question, I don't know if Katia would like to help us with that.
Eu respondendo à segunda questão.
I'd like to answer your second question, especially about the context of this statistic operation. In this particular case, we have this bottom-up approach concerning the need of this information. It came from the society. And the society as general has shown to academia and civil society organizations that we needed to have this data. And we have this will to have this information in the census. That's why the National Institute of Statistics had to answer to this challenge. But institutions like this one that is producing other economic indicators, structural indicators, and different types of information. And in our specific case, we embrace this project, but we don't have resources for so much and for so many challenges that are coming to us. But there's another side that I'd like to highlight concerning this project, that after we have the data, after we give the data to society, after the first disclosure, we didn't dismiss that project. We went on in our institute analyzing the data, having different initiatives. And here it's an initiative by our team, and we propose to have more disclosure, giving more information to society. So sometimes it's an individual initiative and we have a voice and we are able to bring this forward. And sometimes the way to deal with these issues is sometimes to have this space at local level, so that we can bring this message and keep that message, giving continuity to that. Anyone else would like to answer that question? Yes, I can. I think that when you talk about indigenous people, Quilombo people, and meetings with the leaders, that is really complicated. But when you say that the mapping is not going to be the census mapping, that we are going to have different grid because the territory of Quilombo and indigenous communities, they are more flexible. They are not according to the grid. It's quite complicated for some people, but we have a strict analysis, thinking about all of the sides, all the criticism that we could face, all the pillars, everything that is connected. Moisés was laughing during the interview, but we must understand the logistics, the the training. What I'm going to do at the end point, and I can have to come with interviewer asking the questions you want, and with a strict rigor, because when you're doing something different, you cannot make mistakes. Everything that is not perfect could make your project collapse, because the IT people will say it's not good enough and so on. And then you should create a good relationship with all the areas you depend on, because you have to explain why that should be different. Not making that romantic or exotic, because this is a different strategy that you may fall as well. But and the other thing is that when you're able to conquer from the inside, you can conquer from the outside, because you can have this informed consultation, because you get allies outside of IBGE, and then they're going to say, no, the technician is not crazy. We really need this information, and it makes sense. So you also have to balance the visibility and the invisibility of the project according to the context where you are. All of us have experienced different moments in the last decades in several countries where we had moments with greater openness for diversity, and then it was over. So when we count on more diversity to support you, you could be more visible, and sometimes you should be more invisible. So sometimes you give visibility even in a bad moment. If it's ready, you disappear. Nobody remembers indigenous people and Quilombo communities in the next census. So you have different strategies according to the social and political context you're experiencing. Just to answer to Valéria, all the institutes of statistics following the UN guidelines concerning statistic production, we have to prevent the bad use of information. So if there's a news piece using our data wrongly, we ask them to correct that. Sometimes we ask for a footnote, but our media relations is always very attentive. We must correct that because it's our obligation. And something else, the groups must decide what should be visible in the statistics. And then we tell them, once you are in the census, you have to remain in the census. It's not connect data. After it enters census, it's an IBGE data for what's good and for what's bad. So they must be informed so they can make the decision. And then we should have statistic literacy because they can dispute about the data. In Colombia, the indigenous institution is just like an institution of statistics. And you go to ONICI to research this data, not DANI, because they have this strong power on the narrative that they have built over several censuses. So I think that the fear shouldn't stop us from producing data, because the fear of discrimination, the fear of persecution, the fear of leaving the communities even more vulnerable, this is not coming from the census. This is coming from the reality, from the context. And not having data will leave them more vulnerable. This is what we understand from the consultation, knowing that we have a point with that community. At first they thought, oh, we will be able to get to our community, but then we showed them that they were on Google Maps, and they later said, oh, it's visible. Yes, precisely. So when you explain what is existing and what you're giving them, one thing is to find the community at Google Maps, and the other thing is the IBGE saying that we have X community people there.
I think this balance between the gains and the risks, in our consultations, it was always very clear that the gains were much bigger, but there are risks and we can't ignore them. I think Gisele wants to say something briefly. That's what I was going to talk about along the same lines. I'm very concerned with the data, but the racial data specifically is political. And since the 1500s, we are at risk. And the state has used this data strategically. I think there's this concern with the use of private data, the use of this data privately by big techs that have conducted our lives, while the Brazilian state produces the data and we show it to them on paper. The citizen-led initiatives, in our case, we are not pressuring the state to produce this data in large scale because we don't intend to substitute this data in any way. But we want the state to know about this data that we produce. In our case, the idea is to make an indicator out of this, but this is a long process. There are at least 3 years that we have been working on this indicator of racial impact and widening process. And just 1 second about the dictatorship. The National Commission of Truth during the dictatorship acknowledged 430 bodies officially murdered because of the processes of the Emilio Hines Commission, an independent commission that was following up on cases, and they were able to find many of these people who are killed. In São Paulo, between May 8th and 10th, 2016, over 500 people were killed in confrontation with the police, either police with uniforms and without uniforms, because a mother went to the space. At the time, we didn't have the Council of Medicine that we have today. At the time, they decided to place doctors inside the legal medical institutes, the Forensic Institute, to analyze what was happening with the necropsies and to identify those bodies. So we have 516 deaths in 10 days in São Paulo. We have 516 deaths, but the state has never recognized this figure. And part of the identification of bodies that we saw during the dictatorship happened because of initiatives like this as well. So I think the community-led data also has served its purpose. So we have to be concerned with the big tech and the Google and Meta. We're going to wrap up now. A round of applause for those who are here and those who are in the audience as well. Thank you very much for being here. And we're going to have a small break now. And we are returning at 3:15.
Pessoal, só para anunciar que tem café fora, tá? Tem comida, Tem comida, tem então. Okay, in English, if you want to, there's coffee, so be our guest.
Okay, so we'll be our guest. Okay. Ouvi toda a gente. Conseguem ouvir?
Vocês podem ligar.
Olá, boa tarde. Já me conseguem ouvir?
Boa tarde, gente.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Vamos retomar.
Let's
Boa tarde novamente, gente. Vamos voltando.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think there's an echo happening here.
Deu certo? Não sei se tem que dizer agora. Só para testar. Oi, agora? Acho que sim, agora.
Okay, we worked out the echo.
So, if you need translation, don't forget your mic headphone. Pedimos.
We also ask you who are outside to please come back. We have our last panel of the day. We'll start now panel 2, Metrics and Politics, How Numbers Enter and Contest Public Action. For this panel, we have the pleasure of inviting Cristiane Davila, doctor in language and literature, master in communication, and specialist in communication and image, researcher of the Observatory of History and Health of the Oswaldo Cruz House, where she works with scientific dissemination, digital health, and community communication. I also invite to take part in this roundtable Dalcio Marinho, coordinator of Census Maré, working in data production in several projects of Maré. I also invite Letícia Janela, doctor in geography at the Federal Fluminense University and worker at IBG since 2014 and currently the head of the unit of favelas and urban communities and the coordination of geography. We also have the online participation of Catarina Reis de Oliveira. She's the assistant professor in data analysis and sociology of migrations in the Institute of Science, Political Science of the Lisboa University. To mediate this roundtable, I would like to invite Alexandre Camargo.
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, we start here our last session of the day, and we have a little bit of a tight schedule because of the delay, so I'll ask the speakers to speak, please, in 7 to 8 minutes, so we can have a debate at the end. Our session is about the metrics in politics. The way that metrics are incorporated into public policies, what kind of interventions they allow, and what kind of rights are also claimed from these metrics, and also technical consistency matters. What makes these metrics consistent and reliable and considered objective or not objective enough in the processes of legitimacy and legitimatization. I would like to start this roundtable by inviting Professor Catarina Regis Oliveira from the University of Lisbon for her speech. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for the loving invitation. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I have never been in Brazil. That would have been the perfect opportunity for my first visit, but unfortunately it wasn't possible. I will talk about the 22 years of experience in the Observatory of Migrations and some details about it. I'll talk not only about the creation of the observatory, but also a collaboration with other observatories. Also about the quantifications of migrations that the observatory carries out, and the focus on evidence-based public policy. Portugal created this observatory in 2002 when Portuguese was reinforcing its foreign population. We have always been a country with a lot of migration. And we had negative migration until the mid-1990s. With time, the foreign population who lived in Portugal started increasing and increasing. In 2023, we had about 1 million immigrants in Portugal, and also an increase in the impact caused by this foreign population. This was a very fast evolution of the foreign population that more than doubled. We had half of this quantity in the 1990s, and in 2021 it was about 400,000 foreign people living there, and 2 years later this population doubled again, and in 2023 we had over 1 million. This impacted, of course, the creation of public policies. We had the support of the High Commissioner for Immigration and Ethnic Minorities of the UN when we had this quick increase, and somehow we had to create more public policies for immigrants. We had to react quickly, and we had to improve quickly these policies. We then created an observatory that works very closely with the public institutions, and we consolidated a collaborative dialogue with academic surveys and a joint work for public policies with recommendations. We hired a permanent team, but we still work in a network fashion, guaranteeing also the academic exemption and independence. This observatory was created in 2002, as I said, and it has 4 great objectives: building a solid base for evidence-based policies, of the accumulated knowledge that we had. It was a small knowledge, but we still had some knowledge. We wanted to guarantee also a more informed public opinion in the sense of fighting against false perceptions, certain errors of reading and myths. That is why we had this investment in collecting information. The motto of this observatory is to knowing more, to acting for better action. This observatory brings knowledge both to the population and the government. It was very important to survey and collect statistical and administrative information and at the end of the day, impact in public policies. We had a qualitative leap in information that also has to do with the big investment and the number of publications that were launched in the last 20 years. We were trying to disseminate data and facts in the sense of not being occasional studies. Occasional studies, of course, were very important for review of policies and legislation, but we wanted to have studies, more constant studies.
So, with this systematization of the information that was becoming public. So we launched in 2014, and then we had this recommendation for this action plan to integrate the immigrants, and that work started in the second plan from 2010, and then this first report was a report to teach and raise awareness so that we understood that the census data was a starting point, but that wouldn't be enough for the mapping needs and for monitoring the residents, the foreign population that was now residing in Portugal. So we had it started to have yearly reports on the statistics, and we had this partnership with the National Institute of Statistics in Portugal, and I was able to hear their presentation, and that was timely and very important to have this institutional partnership, because we understood that those institutions had the information, but they weren't able to disseminate the information for the actors that need the information. And so the products that I'm showing here were the products we developed for that. So we had reports and indicators on immigration and migration in general, but that couldn't reach the general public. Because that detail level is not always capturing the public attention. So the work was developed with the dissemination of infographics, with summaries showing that the communication strategies were underlying the data, generating fast reading with no bias, and at the same time we used short sentences, bringing data on migration and immigration with infographics and dynamic charts. I'm sorry to interrupt. May I ask you to conclude, because we don't have much time? Yes, I just wanted to show you the communication strategies that we adopted. We understood that we had a lot of information available, but effectively, this information is only accessible for those who are interested in the topic at first. So we needed this promotional strategy, and then we noticed that the Portuguese consume a lot of coffee, so we had this partnership with Delta, and part of these charts were shown there as well. So I'm now concluding that we raised the awareness with this exercise, with these 15 dimensions considered in the statistic reports, and then we fed the strategies to disseminate the facts. So we had 47 statistic sources and administrative sources, 32 of them were national, 16 are international, with 312 indicators. we then combined the data from INS, the National Institute of Statistics, and with all the richness of this data. So that was a qualitative step because we had information about the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Justice, and we use that administrative information to list all the wealth of data that is available. So I'm going to end here. Thank you for your attention. I thank you for the presentation and the collaboration. So please, let's be brief according to the order. Cristiane now. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Thank you for attending this Congress. Thank you, Alexandre, for the invitation. I'd like to congratulate all the team from InfoCitizen. It's a very well organized seminar. So I'm bringing this collective project that ended in 2024, but it's still bearing fruit. So that was a project that was I'm going to talk briefly about the team, the project, what was the motivation, the method, the indicators, and also the cartography. So we had the survey here at Fundação Oswaldo Cruz, and also with the Mobilization Front at Maré, the Fala Manguinhos newspaper, the Raízes Institute, and also this movement from Complexo do Alemão Favelas, and with incentive to innovation. I participated with Renata Borges. She's an archiver here at Casa Oswaldo Cruz, and this is a very important element, the archive. And sometimes we are not attentive because we are in this, but because we are in this institute that is very much concerned with heritage, we had this concern. So we had Heitor and Fabio also working with Luisa, Patricia Ferreira, who is also the design chief, and she is also part of the dictionary, Marielle Franco, Paloma Menezes, who is also a researcher of this Favelas Dictionary and Marielle Franco Dictionary, and also David Amen from Raízes Institute, Fábio Monteiro from Fala Manguinhos, Gisele Martins, who has her documentary movie called Scent of Diesel that was awarded in the Festival of Rio, and also Vinicius Moraes from the Codifica Institute. And our main motivation, well, we got together to do this project to think about the perspective of community communication. So are the favela collectives potential agents for promoting health? Because this is a national policy, and we wanted to know precisely that, how the communication could promote and collaborate with health care in this broad way, with well-being, housing, mobility, labor, leisure, culture. And here our assumptions. These are territories who suffer with violence. The communicator work doesn't have much institutional visibility. They lack material infrastructure, and they depend on volunteers. But their actions are impacting the residents' health in a positive way in cases of armed conflicts and social work. So we wanted to work with this group, bringing people that could collaborate. And we wanted to use mechanisms to give visibility to this communication, strengthening their agenda and strengthening the collective identity, promoting the appreciation of these professionals who are suffering with mental health and violence, because it's an exhaustive work and a risk work, and contributing for the praxis of these collectives so that they can be aligned with the SDGs, the UN SDGs for 2030. So we had this participatory action research using this qualitative approach, and we analyzed the content. We had this online questionnaire. We had interviews with the 4 participants, and this questionnaire was distributed between April 2nd and May 5th because we wanted to identify the objectives in this area here, encompassing Manguinhos, Maré, Ramos, because Rio is divided into these areas, and we've used the 28 neighborhoods with whom we maintain good relations with research and different actions in terms of social cooperation with the Museum of Life that we have here. So we launched our questionnaire with 12 questions. Some are open, some are closed questions. It wasn't easy because we didn't have much time, but we were able to get 27 responses. That was the visual arts of the project. And using with content analysis, we transformed that into 7 indicators, 7 categories. The first, the self-identification of the collective. And we wanted to know how they identified themselves as a communication collective or a journalism collective with an outlet, if it was an individual initiative, if it was community journalism, if it was just an initiative and not a collective, how they organized. So almost 50% identified as a collective, a community communication. For instance, Favela em Pauta said that they are a collective of communitary journalism promoting the young perspective of the favelas. So we wanted to know which were the social media outlets that they were using, and later on we had another meeting with the people that is dealing with projects at Fiocruz, and the most important social media that they identified was LinkedIn, but this is not very much used by them. They use mostly Instagram, and the number of workers is not enough. So Arthur da Penha is working by himself, so they don't have enough workforce. So in terms of space, physical space, sometimes they have the space, other times they use other places that don't belong to them, and most of the times it's not enough. Sometimes people work at home, but on the other hand, the impact in the health promotion was recognized by almost 90% of them, especially those who started with the pandemic, with the Mobilization Front Maré. Cris, it's 8 minutes of presentation now. And then we have Davi speaking here, and Raízes em Movimento, the different campaigns, and the communication within the favela with local language, with no stereotypes. If they notice that the model of communications of the collectives are promoting access and participation, and Labijaca, for instance, said that the flagship was the citizen-generated data, bringing the population together. The Quilombo Moderno from Alemão Favela said that it was giving opportunity for the favela population. Papo Reto said that a great deal of the communication material is proposed by residents who are suggesting the agenda. So it's a very fruitful communication. And we wanted to know if they knew other collectives, and yes, yes, most of them knew other collectives, so it was a sign that we could have this network work to help with, in terms of equipment and personnel. And our map with all of the questions are at the platform here. It's an open code platform. And then we had this map that you received in your bag. We had this digital representation identifying the different locations, the networks, and the QR code for you to see the questions that we asked. And you're going to receive this PDF with all the questions and answers. And that's it. Thank you.
Super obrigado, Cris.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Por favor, chamo o Dálcio.
I'd like to call Dálcio Marinho now.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be brief.
Eu sou da Rede da Maré.
I'm from Redes da Maré.
Acabou de falar porque Redes da Maré faz parte da frente.
Redes da Maré is part of this project that Cristiane just mentioned, and between 2010 and 2016, we were able to do this project called Censo da Maré in 3 parts. First, with the survey and update of the existing maps, those used by the City Hall of Rio de Janeiro, and also those from IBGE, and then we had this economic census and then a residence census. This project has had many fruits. It was replicated at the São Paulo University, and the advanced studies of the chair Olavo Setúbal in 4 favelas neighboring USP, the University of São Paulo, with Butantã campus and Ayashi campus, with our collaboration, because we are part of the methodological application, and we are now starting with the same technology in Heliópolis, in São Paulo, the 2nd greatest favela in São Paulo. Why should we have a census since we have official data that is also covering the favelas? Well, there are several reasons. We've been discussing in all of the panels that the citizen-generated data is disrupting this invisibility of the territories and communities, normally vulnerable communities that are excluded. So we disrupt this invisibility, and then we show what these communities and what these territories, what they have. So we no longer only talk about lack. So we are showing what we have, and by doing so, we create this paradigm shift showing the power of the territory. And this is very important because in the favela territories, the achievements and what the territories and communities are exposing in terms of service, facilities, and public policies, we rarely see that being offered by the public power in a spontaneous way. So this is a fruit of the pressure by the residents. When the state is defining where to invest, normally it invests more in those areas that are providing more visibility, those who are contributing with more tax, where the residents have more political power. So in the popular territories is the power of complaints and also power of the residents that is making the public policy to arrive there. So we qualify the leaders with the public power and the private power so that we can better dimension the demands and priorities, and we are able to quantify them. And with this kind of production and with the experience coming from our work, we thought about using the common resident that is not a leader, and then we developed products that could be disseminated. So in the school census step, we have guide for streets and also for stores, and this is very useful, and we know that people people use these products in schools, educational projects, and also public health agents moving in the territory. And we have their testimonies recorded, and also by churches, evangelical churches. We have pastors coming to people's houses. They also use our data, our maps. Sebrae has used the data with this project with entrepreneurs. So business people have accessed suppliers within the territory. So we are able to produce this information to them. So our objective was never to challenge the work by IBGE and official bodies. On the opposite, I myself, I admire a lot these bodies. I've worked in the census in 1991, and then I was trained in the Census and Statistics School by IBGE, and I admire a lot their work. So we repeat their method because it's very reliable, and then we are going to complement that because we are going to survey information, because at the scale they work, they are not able to approach the details. Never. So we need more specific information. But today we see, Marta just talked about all these advancements of IBGE, collecting information about Colombo communities, indigenous and traditional communities.
And I know that there's a plan by IBGE to try to create a few questions that are specific for favelas and urban territories, because there is no specific survey today. But even though there's this intention and these plans, they will never manage to encompass all of the questions necessary for data survey, because each territory has their own specificity. They have their urgencies, and because of the vulnerabilization they go through, but each territory goes through different factors and different types of vulnerabilization. So it's important to preserve this production, because this production has more thorough details, and IBGE should support us and our professionals with training and with validation of that data. How much time do I have? 2 minutes? I'll try to show very briefly. I cannot explain into detail, but there's a third factor. I talked about visibility. I talked about subsidizing and qualifying, subsidizing the demands and claims of the local actors, and qualifying this dialogue of advocacy with the public administration and the private initiative. But somehow we can also I'm sorry. I think I passed too many slides. Now I can't go back to the presentation anymore. Yeah, the presentation closed. But to stay within the time, now I have to go through all the slides again. You have 1 more minute. We'll give you 1 more minute. I'll go slowly, so I don't pass too many slides again. I want to stop 4 slides from now. Here, that's where I want to stop. Okay, now I learned how to go back a slide. This is what I wanted to show you. We have a third reason that could be being able to produce data that the state, because of the interest gap and the mobilization gap, that we're having an improvement on today. We have here this representation of state bodies that are talking about these recent changes in the state policies, but historically we have this gap that the state has always kept. I'll try to be as brief as possible for 1.5 minutes. But you can see here, there are 5 neighborhoods of the city of Rio de Janeiro. If you are not from here, Rio de Janeiro has 166 legally defined neighborhoods that are legally outlined. This is the division of the city on top, and in the bottom I highlight 5 neighborhoods. Bom Sucesso, the favelas of Maré, and the Alemão neighborhood, which is also made only of favelas. Maré was outlined in 1994 and Alemão was outlined in 1993. I also bring here the neighborhood of Gávea, which is one of the 3 richest neighborhoods in Rio de Janeiro, and the neighborhood of Rocinha, which is also another favela that was legalized as a neighborhood in 1986, with decrees passed by the municipal government of Rio. During the COVID-19, the upper left box shows, according to the IBGE census, the conditions of these 5 neighborhoods, the population of these 5 neighborhoods: Maré, Rocinha, Alemão, Bom Sucesso, and Gávea. Maré was emancipated from Bom Sucesso, even though they're neighboring neighborhoods, and a big part of Alemão, before being Alemão, was also part of Bom Sucesso. And Maré, out of the 162 neighborhoods in 2022, but today it's 166. Maré is the 10th most populated neighborhood in the city. Rocinha is the 20th most populated neighborhood, and Alemão is the 28th. Bom Sucesso and Gávea are further back in 105th and 164th positions. During the COVID, the official data that we had in the panel, the dashboard, the national dashboard, the official dashboard, was disaggregated by the municipal government and disclosed daily. When we accessed this dashboard, we saw these distortions. And in the case of COVID, we look at the prevalence rate, and Gávea was the second highest prevalence rate in the city, where the favelas had one of the highest prevalence rates in the city. And the situation was not different with lethality. It was still in Bom Sucesso, it was number 72. In Bom Sucesso, it was 72 deaths. And in Rocinha and Gávea, they were the 4th highest lethality of the city. The same thing I could say the same thing about the schools that have an effect on the dropout rates. This is due to the poor quality of the records on addresses in these neighborhoods. IBG is trying to work this out, but it's going to take a long time. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, people didn't even have their compatible addresses to be informed of the systems of the healthcare service. They didn't even know which hospital they should go to. For example, for Rocinha, people with COVID had to go to hospitals in Gávea. Any sensible person will look at this data and know that it is not a reality. But the problem is that the public administration and all of the initiatives to face the COVID, for example, did not have the real data. We knew that this is not the real data, but we didn't know what the real data was. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Please, can you project my presentation? Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for this opportunity to be here in dialogue with you. These are very rich debates, and The presentations have a lot of interesting developments. It's the beginning of a lot of debates and the continuity of many other debates that have been going on for a long time. This time is very short. We need to select what we're going to talk about and highlight among so much data and so many debates that could be proposed here. So I chose to do a presentation approaching this meeting between official statistics and the civil society, bringing specifically the recent experience of IBGE with the favelas and urban communities. We're here talking about an experience that changes substantially, especially after the census of 2022. So from 2023 onwards, with the process of change in nomenclature, it doesn't mean that IBGE was not engaged in favelas and urban communities before. We have done that since the 1950 census, but there are different characteristics from census to census. I will talk about these different areas. So the idea is to discuss the name, the concept, the methodology, the data produced, and the use and appropriation of this data. Starting with the name. Names are not neutral. Names are a reflection of reality, and the name can intervene in this process. So this change made by IBGE in January 2024 from subnormal agglomerates to favelas and urban communities have an expressive impact. And IBGE took the responsibility at the time to continue this process of reconfiguration of the way to produce statistics and data in this territory. It's important to say that IBGE is the only statistics institute that we know that maps favelas and urban communities before the census. So it is a very big challenge that is started in the 1950 census. It was resumed in 2010 and it was improved in 2022. It's important to make it clear. It's also important to say that with the change in nomenclature, we changed the criteria that are part of the concept that make up this concept. These changes were used during the 2022 census, so the idea was to start using the name favelas and urban communities for the 2022 census. This change is closely related to our constitutional and institutional provisions. It is the result of cycles of contestation and pressure from the society that were very intense, especially after we disclosed the outcomes of 2010. This name was the result of a process of dialogue that included a series of different meetings and conferences and culminated in the national meeting in December 2023. And in addition to the change in nomenclature and the change in criteria, we wrote a letter of demands to the IBGE, agreed in a plenary session with several agendas that we have been facing since 2023, aiming at the 2030 census. We say that this letter is our work plan. The letter guides our work plan until the next census. So in addition to the change in name, we are also discussing we're also discussing the content of the concept, especially this first criterion that defines the favelas and urban communities for IBGE, which is the predominance of households with legal insecurity This is a very questioned criterion by the society, because at the same time, it is a very fragile information to be obtained. We have very diverse conditions of availability of this information, and at the same time, it leaves out different segments of the society that shouldn't be left out, and they are left out because of this legal insecurity. We are now starting this year a bunch of dialogues before the 2030 census. So we can consider the huge challenge of talking about these territories all over Brazil with such high diversity. What is operationalized, what is operationalizable, what is not. Here we have a map of the favelas of Maré for the IBGE. There are 11 favelas identified in this territory, and we receive information from several sources, as Dalcio just said here. For him, Maré, the whole neighborhood of Maré is made up of favelas. So the first divergence that we have is the number of favelas that actually made of Maré. This is a screenshot from the first meeting of the advisory group this year to discuss this concept. This is the agenda on the right hand side. There's our agenda of work. This is an open group. We have the participation of people that participate more or less often, depending on the topics that are discussed. In methodology, we have dialogued with other actors to improve the process. This is the main agenda for this year, involving the 2030 census and the improvement of data collection in favelas and urban communities. We're developing a semi-automatized methodology. And in the data department, it's important to talk about the tensions that we experience regarding the data that is produced by IBGE. We disclosed the outcomes for this universe of favelas and urban communities. At the end of 2025, we disclosed also the results about the households in this area and comparing the households inside and outside this area. And this year we will disclose the results of the sample that we used so that we can represent a set of favelas. And in the case of the biggest favelas and urban communities, we're going to have specific outcomes for them. But there are still gaps, as Dalcio mentioned in his presentation. There are demands from the society to include new questions in the survey, specific surveys for the favelas, which is not the case of IBGE. IBGE includes the favelas and urban communities, but there's no specific research on the favelas and the urban communities. So there is a demand for adding new questions. We will assess, as Dalcio mentioned, the possibility of creating questions that are spatially controlled, as done with the indigenous communities and quilombolas for these specific territories. But there are demands that are impossible to be effectively operationalized. That is why it's important to have surveys made by the communities, as Dalcio mentioned very well. Issues related to neighboring relationships, solidarity, the territorial identity, public security. This is all in debate and in discussion. It will be in discussion for the next few years, but these are very difficult topics that are very difficult to be assessed at a national scale by IBGE. And I think this has a very close relationship with the question, how can the official statistics find the citizen-led generation of data? It is also important to highlight a huge effort by IBGE regarding the use and appropriation of the data produced. We disclosed the outcomes at the end of 2024. And in 2025, we carried out many, almost 30 workshops with our team in different territories. We are very few in the team. It's important to make it clear. We are 4 people currently. So we went to several territories, organizations, and we have this concern with showing how to access the data, that the data exists, what are the platforms, so that the populations themselves can use the data that is produced and appropriate them and have them as instruments to claim improvements for their territories. We have an anxiety, a specific anxiety regarding the scale of these initiatives. We talk about 30 workshops, but for Brazil, it's very little. So we're trying to scale this up. We recorded a workshop organized by UN Habitat. This workshop was carried out in October, and so far we had over 100 views. You can see that there is a big demand from the society regarding the use of this data. So this is the message that I had to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of the members of the panel. Very exciting speeches. So now we are going to ask a question before we open for debate. And I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about government statistics and citizen-generated data with the Maré census, IBGE census. Based on your experience, what is transforming this data into a reliable data, and what's the importance to communicate the numbers to this larger audience, and what should we do to have this process well done? And I'm thinking about scale and how the collaborative networks could have this top-down approach and bottom-up approach. Catarina is no longer with us, but we don't have any other... Catarina is here. I'll have to leave in 10 minutes, but I could try and participate now. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes. Understanding the experience of the Migration Observatory in articulation with several public institutions, I'd like to explain that many times the challenge was to understand that when we were doing the studies, many times the reactions had to do with the options we have behind the studies. So when we started to use data, administrative data, we had to be aware about the scale and the complex universe that we were using. So the interviewers were able to use this administrative data, and it was a very efficient way to get to the public. We were talking about complete universes. So the great challenge to us was to find alternative strategies for the communication. I was able to bring some examples. For instance, our intervention on social media, when we had the sugar package with with some charts and quick facts, not only to inform the public opinion, but also to raise the awareness, just to show them what we thought was relevant. So our expectation was to reach this larger audience. because we have to work with not only with those who are interested at first, but we should enhance this audience.
E essa procura de procurar conteúdo e informação. E, portanto,
Therefore, what I would like to share is concerning the reliability of sources. That has to do with the dissemination of ideas, because we've been communicating our social relationship with foreign people, understanding that this is a piece of data from the pension institution, that we have this kind of information, but we must be very careful with what we are going to inform, because this is sensitive information, and we could try to find alternative ways to disseminate this knowledge. This is one of the greatest challenges. We could have quality studies with data collection with a lot of quality, but maybe the public wouldn't be aware about the numbers. We couldn't transfer that knowledge. That's when we have this feeling that we should have a greater investments in different alternative charts and different designs in terms of information, so that we could inform in a simple and fast way. In Portugal, in recent years, we've been having this feeling that we see this post-truth and this narrative against immigrants. So we have to try and disseminate other facts. And this is one of the greatest challenges. And sometimes they try to dismiss the institutions producing data. This is an important aspect. So thank you so much for listening from me, and congratulations for this important conference. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on. Let's try to answer in only 3 minutes, okay? I think what's important is that the produced and collected data must be communicated. So it must reach the people who participated in the interviews, participated in that movement of data generation. So what we did with our research was to have this seminar. We have this methodology on oral accounts, and we call that this seminar on testimonies. And we brought together this audience, and we had predetermined questions that could be answered and then answered back. So we have Thais, was part of the organization of this material, and we've been working to have this public policy draft on community communication, transforming data into access and products that could reach people, either with podcasts, maps, these terms in the favela dictionary, but going beyond that, bringing people together. We were able to bring the representative Renata Souza, and we tried to bring that to the Congress, to the National Council of Health, to the Ministry of Health, so that the community communication is a structuring element. In the case of the National Council, we've been working with this policy for communicating with the national public health system. So all this knowledge, all this experience, all the expertise of these communicators, they should be considered by the ministry, by the national health system. So we are bringing data, we are bringing information from this project and other projects, so that we can transform the projects into a policy that can strengthen the communication, trying to empower the communities. Even in a small scale, we were able to show that this is possible.
Bom, assim,
Well,
apesar de muitas vezes os órgãos estatais, eles não
many
terem
times
escuta,
the state bodies, they don't listen to what the public society
esses atores
is producing with the community
a produção está
actors.
acontecendo,
But the production is happening,
esses atores estão cada
and
vez
these
mais
actors are more and more
então, esse movimento está
forming
acontecendo, está
networks.
servindo
So
para dentro
this
da
movement
nossa
is
vida.
happening and it's serving for
Agora
the
existe uma coisa
territory
muitas vezes, como você
interests.
falou, a validação.
You talked about the validation of the information, if it's reliable or not.
Não há ninguém
Well,
mais interessado em ter dados com precisão.
the actors that are the most interested in exact data that are serving their purposes are the actors that are producing data. That's why in all the networks that I know, those working in partnerships, articulating, there's this concern, this great concern about fulfilling the methodological rules so that we can have reliable data that can be communicated.
Falta, muitas vezes,
What is lacking many times
essa externalização.
is
E outros setores
promoting
da sociedade,
that to the outside so that other segments such as
estatais,
the academia and state bodies that
daquela informação
lack
que está sendo
that
produzida,
information that is being produced with the citizen generated data
forma,
that could be using the data somehow.
vezes,
What is lacking
chegar a esses,
is that we are able
essas instâncias e
to bring the information
tem
to
também,
these
de
instances.
certa forma, um certo preconceito em relação a
And
esse dado.
there
Às
is
vezes não inspira
there's some prejudice against this data because sometimes they don't
então, há uma
trust
necessidade
the data generated by
de
citizens.
eventos como esse e esse evento
That's why we have events like this one, and this event is going to contribute to improve
porque certamente
the-
vai passar estão e vão passar por
the
aqui
outreach of these projects, because we have here people who weren't aware about the quality
né, da
and the
produção
hard
de
work
diversos atores que estão aqui mostrando suas experiências em rede.
that was necessary to produce the
Nós não
data.
estamos falando só para nós mesmos,
And we are building
contatos,
in
pessoas
network,
aqui
so
que
we are
estão,
not talking to ourselves. We have guests here
funcionando
who
e
might
próximo
be
da frente,
impressed with this data,
esse
and
dado.
from now on they must be more
É
attentive.
importante sempre também
So it's important to have this kind of event,
a
and it's also
escuta
important
e a
to
proximidade
so that they can guide, support, and validate this production. This way, the production may become a more systematic production and a production that is
na sociedade.
more disseminated into
Sendo do
the
interesse,
society.
inclusive, do próprio Estado.
And this is the interest of the state.
Obrigado.
Bom, acho que
Well, I think that from the perspective of the National Institute of Statistics, it's hard to answer this question without mentioning the guiding principles of the official statistics, which is our North Star. And among them, we have confidentiality, impartiality, equal access, preventing the bad use, transparency, ethics in the production of data, several principles that are largely discussed in global forum, and that makes a data reliable. So this is the first point. The second concerns
de que sejam desenhadas
the
metodologias
need to design
transparentes.
robust and transparent methodologies.
É relativamente comum, não é o
It's
caso das
quite
experiências
common.
que a gente conhece assim daqui, mas
It's not the case of our experiences here, but we find some outcomes from surveys and research, and we ask about the methodology, and it's not so clear, it's not so transparent. So that makes the outcomes more fragile. So it's quite important to have the methodology well established when you produce data. It should be well described in detail so that we don't have gaps,
que eles possam ser legitimados.
so that we can have legitimate
Outro ponto que eu acho que
data.
tem tudo a ver com essa discussão da mesa.
The other point has to do with this panel discussion
Fala aqui.
and the focus that I brought to my speech, and it's more and more clear to us that we should have this permanent dialogue with the society in a structured way. Without this dialogue, we cannot legitimate data. I think that this dialogue must be established in all of the processes when we produce statistics, from the inception, from the concept development, and passing through planning and dissemination of results. This is a factor that will make data much more reliable for society. And we've been working hard to get that, but it's a huge challenge in this context of fake news. And it's also associated to the need for clear, accessible communication with practical example, adhering to the different realities according to the community, according to the population. This is a great challenge. We know that this is something that we must face at IBGE. The access to data in our portals, not always is it easy to access data. And this is clear to us. This is something we need to advance with. And the same is valid for other data producers. So these are the main points that I wanted to talk about. So please, a round of applause to the guests.
Olha, para ser representativo com o debate da plateia, temos direito a duas.
We have the right to 2 questions for the audience and probably 1 online, right? So let's have the online question and then
Eu trago uma
we
pergunta
open
da
up.
Andrea Soares, do grupo
I
Ginga
bring
da
a
UFA,
question
para Letícia.
by Andrea Soares to Letícia. Her group is Ginga da UF. The sample results are able to provide inferences for the favelas.
Responda agora ou vai juntar? Vamos juntar. Tem mais alguém que queira fazer?
Do you want to ask more questions?
Então pode responder.
So please answer.
A minha pergunta tem a ver,
My question has to do with the link that
fake news.
Letícia
Minha pergunta nesse sentido.
just talks about this link with fake news. So in this economic, social, political context, when we have this evidence production that is more robust, based on reality, trying to maintain the lived experience as well, trying to raise the awareness of more people in the society, how could we deal with this ambivalence? Because we have more and more data, robust data, well-prepared data, but we have a society that might not be open to, or maybe sectors of this society are not open to listen to the numbers. Maybe they don't believe the numbers. How should we evaluate this paradox?
Tem mais uma rápida perguntinha ainda.
Another brief question to wrap up.
Só vou fazer porque eu sou viciado em liquidação, tá?
I'm addicted to these moments. I'm going to ask a question. In other countries, we are able to see some technical comparisons between state agents and different civil society organizations in order to have public policies that will count with citizen-generated data. Here in Brazil, we don't have public policies on that. It's very rare to see a state agent starting this data collection that will count on this step concerning citizen-generated data. I wanted to know about your workplace. How do you see these possibilities? Have you tried this kind of approach? Is it possible? And if it's possible, what's lacking so that we can have this window of opportunity happening in Brazil?
About the question on the sample, we had different samples for the favelas and urban communities in the 2022 census to enable the dissemination of data through the weighing of these questionnaires. So IBGE is going to be able to disseminate the results of the sample at least for a set of favelas and urban communities. We will define areas. We call them areas of dissemination of the sample. These areas are going to be divided into two sub-areas, one of them formed only by favelas and urban communities and another formed by the other territories. In some cases, the cases of the 20 largest urban communities, we are going to be able to provide the results of the sample to them directly. So all of the formatting of the sample fractions during collection, the whole planning was designed so we could get to this outcome at the end. And it is a very complex methodology. We are working hard on that. And you will have all the details, all the criteria that was used for the definition of these areas. And this is going to be a very comprehensive dissemination of the sample. Regarding the tough question by Moises, I don't think we have a recipe on how to deal with this paradox. We actually have a landslide of data in all meanings, an excess of information. Everybody has access to constant information all the time in the palm of their hands, and it's a lot of information and data. It's a lot of figures, and at the same time, it's a huge growth of society's resistance to evidence. The evidence that will be related to the processes of society transformation and public policies. The part that concerns IBGE, the big effort should be in communication. We need to establish ways to communicate the data and the outcomes, guaranteeing a reach of a larger audience, a non-specialized audience. And this has to be within a process of capacity building, statistical literacy. I guess IBG has tried to advance in this sense, but there's still a long path to run. There's still a lot to be done. I'm not able to answer you in a better way because there's not a lot of information yet. And about Paulinho's question, if you could give us the experience of those countries that promoted the public policies of articulation, it would be interesting to know them because it is very interesting and important thinking in a Brazilian and a national scale, in a degree of diversity and fragmentation that we're dealing with in the case of IBGE, in the case of favelas and urban communities, we mapped in 2022 over 12,000 favelas and urban communities. And we still need a standardized methodology that allows comparison. So this is a huge challenge. The initiatives of citizen-generated data are local. They belong to the territories and they have their own methods according to the local demands and needs. So IBGE needs to develop a nationally standardized methodology. I'm not sure how to face this challenge. I think this conversation needs to happen because the question is there. It's being asked by the society, but there is still a big effort and maybe a lot of creativity in medium and to long term to think about these possibilities. But it's very challenging, something very challenging. But I would like to get to know these experiences, Paulinho. I would also like to know these experiences, so if you can share them with me too. The next idea for a seminar, maybe. I think the decision makers and the policymakers, they only act if the society is mobilized. If the society is not mobilized, nothing happens. And for the society to get mobilized, they need to have information. They need to be enticed with data and information and with communication. So with that, you clarify and you draw the attention to certain issues, then the society is going to pressure for the public administration to do something about that. As we saw in Thais's survey, the legislation on communication in Brazil are from the 1990s. When the internet didn't exist, there was nothing related to it. They stimulated reading newspapers in schools. There wasn't even a communication and data policy. So we're still undergoing a very outdated situation. So I think it's about using instruments to popularize this information in a way that the population can ask for things and pressure and demand change. With finance, with the private finance that go to the publicity of a municipal government, but it does not go to the workshop on how to use an app that affects the mobility of people in the city. So I think it should go along these lines. We should make the data very accessible. This question by Moises is very exciting. The context of fake news. And in this context demands even more from us to strengthen the citizen-generated data. Because there is a dispute of narratives. Fascism emerges in the first half of the 20th century in Western Europe, having as one of the pillars propaganda based on artificial truth and the creation of truth. And any similarity to today is not a mere coincidence to what is happening today. I mean, there is also the same happening in the global extreme right movements that produce everyday artificial truths. It is no longer what we used to call the post-truths. It is now over that barrier. It is an artificial truth. It's a lot more in your face than that. So we have to face that somehow. We have to have the attention of all of the segments that are working towards sustaining and maintaining the democratic rule of law. This context that we used to believe existed of a stable global order, that is one of the tools. The unity of the state agencies and the civil society and the private initiative is something fundamental. And then I do a bridge with Paulinho's question, because Leticia mentioned this a few minutes ago, the reliability of the production of a certain survey. You cannot embrace any kind of survey. You have to look at the reliability. ABGE and other bodies like municipal governments, for example, the bodies that are part of this national system of geographic and statistical information that is coordinated by IBGE, has to be strengthened as well. Because it's being dismantled throughout time. And today we see municipal bodies that have no communication with the federal administration, and they should have. We need to strengthen this. And this gives us room to also have the participation of civil society, the collectives and organizations that are producing data. She mentioned the risk of bad data production. And we have many paths to work this out, and I don't know 99% of them. I think one of the paths is to always work in a network. The consortia of organizations today, the groups that are formed, the networks that are formed for a certain survey or a certain action, lead us to a greater reliability, to a greater credibility. I mean reliability regarding the collective construction, so the method could be more accurate, but the credibility of that outcome, credibility of that production for the society and among ourselves. It was nothing done individually. It was something made up by a group, and I think we have taken steps towards that. Just to add something that I remembered after I spoke, there is a discussion at the UN, and there's a global discussion on dialoguing the statistical institutes with the citizen-generated data. We're not heading this effort, but IBG participating in a meeting about it. And I was thinking, this is a very challenging debate, but we will have to face it at a certain point. It's something that I forgot, or my colleagues are going to complain with me afterwards. I should have said that in the beginning of the presentation. As Marta said, that the experience of the 2022 census resulted in the creation of the management of traditional peoples and indigenous peoples. This topic of favelas and urban communities also represents an institutional leap, especially with the revision of the nomenclature. And with 2030 census in mind, we also had the same process for the favelas and urban communities. We created a management as well. It used to be a department within a bigger management, but now it's a management. It's a coordination in itself. This shows our institutional commitment with these two topics that are so specific and challenging. Thank you very much to Leticia, Dalcio, and Cristiane, and Catarina, all of you that were with us in this journey, both face-to-face and online. Tomorrow we have more. And I'll correct a crazy mistake. This book is for sale outside. I didn't say that before. So if you are interested, the book that is launched is available for sale outside. We can still socialize a little bit in the hall because this space is going to close in a few minutes. So we close this auditorium, but you can still talk in the hall. I would also like to thank the interpreters. Thank you to the interpreters. Probably had some trouble with the speed that we were talking in the beginning, especially when we talk about visibilizing things and making things understood. Thank you, everyone in the booth. Thank you so much.